Welcome students. I hope you all are doing good. In this video, I am going to explain you part 2 of chapter 8, The Dying Detective. In this presentation, I am going to start from page 114. Let's begin. Unable to settle down, I walked slowly around the room, examining the pictures of celebrated criminals with which every wall was adorned. So, my dear students, in part 2, I have explained how this situation came. So, this conversation was happening between Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes. As Dr. Watson was not settled down and he was walking through the room and started examining all the pictures which were put together on the wall, and he was trying to examine through that. Finally, I came to the metal piece. In the midst of a jumble of objects was a small black and white ivory box with a sliding lid. I stretched out my hand to examine it more closely. As Dr. Watson was examining some of the pictures, so he saw and came across to a structure which is above a fireplace. In the middle of those objects, he saw a small black and white ivory box which has a sliding lid. And then, after that, Dr. Watson stretched out his hand to see that box in a close manner. It was a dreadful cry that he gave. "Put it down, down, this instant, Watson." Then suddenly Dr. Watson heard a very dreadful cry, wherein Sherlock Holmes asked him to put it down, the small box which he had took from that mental piece. His head sank back upon the pillow and he gave a deep sigh of relief as I kept the box back upon the metal piece. Then suddenly, after hearing the voice of Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson put that box at the place, and then after that Sherlock Holmes sank back upon the pillow and take a sign of relief when he put the black box upon the metal piece. "Thank you, that is excellent. Now you will have the kindness to place some letters and papers upon this table within my reach." After thanking Dr. Watson, he asked him in a very kind manner to place some letters and papers so that he can reach by himself. "There is a sugar tongue over there. Kindly raise that small ivory box with its assistance. Place it here among the papers. You can now go and fetch Mr. Culverton Smith of 13 Lower Burke Street." After that, he was asking Dr. Watson to put the ivory box with the assistance of the sugar tongue, and then he can easily place that ivory box among the papers, and then Sherlock Holmes asked Dr. Watson to meet Mr. Culverton Smith. "I have never heard the name," said I. "Watson, it may surprise you to know that the man who is best versed in this disease is not a medical man, but a planter. Mr. Smith is a well-known resident of Sumatra now visiting London." So, my dear students, here Dr. Watson was trying to explain that he doesn't know who was Mr. Culverton Smith and he didn't heard the name. But with that, Sherlock Holmes tries to explain to Dr. Watson that it may surprise him that the disease from which Sherlock Holmes was suffering can be cured not by a medical man but a planter, because that person is very skilled and knowledgeable. So that Mr. Smith is a well-known resident of Sumatra and he is going to visit London soon. If you could persuade him to come here and give us the benefit of his unique experience of this disease, the investigation of which has been his dearest hobby, I cannot doubt that he could help me. So in this paragraph, he was trying to explain him that you should ask him, that means you should ask Mr. Smith to come over to his place and he will surely going to give them some benefits of the experience of the disease as the investigation of all those such activities has been his dearest hobby, and he will surely going to help them. There is no good feeling between us. His nephew Watson, the boy, died in a horrible way. I had suspicions of foul play and I allowed him to see it. He has a grudge against me. You will soften him, Watson. Now, my dear students, Sherlock Holmes is trying to explain the relation between him and Mr. Smith. Now he is saying that there is no good feeling, that means there is no good relationship between them, as his nephew, that boy, died in a very horrible manner. And Sherlock Holmes has a doubt that his uncle played an unfair act, that means especially a murder of that child, and because of that he allowed him to see it. Might be he has a feeling of dislike against him. So he was trying to explain Dr. Watson so he might can soften him and bring him home. I will bring him in a cab if I have to carry him down to it. Here, the meaning of cab is mentioned as a horse-drawn carriage for public hire. So he was saying that he will bring him through that. You will do no such thing. You will persuade him to come and then return before him. But Sherlock Holmes explained to Dr. Watson that you should persuade him instead of coming with him, and then afterwards you have to return before he reaches the home. Make any excuse so as to not come with him. Don't forget, Watson, don't fail me. He lay back upon the bed, murmuring in a confused way about oceans and fishes. Now Sherlock Holmes has a very expectations from Dr. Watson that he said that he should make an excuse not to come with him. And he also told Dr. Watson that he should not forget and he should not disappoint Sherlock Holmes. And then after saying all of this, he laid back upon the bed and started saying a little things in a very confused manner. I left him babbling like a child and descended down the steps of the house. As I stood whistling for a cab, a man came to me through the fog. And then what happens? Dr. Watson left him like a child, like he was blabbling. Blabbling means speaking in a meaningless and a confused manner. So Dr. Watson left him and he was just murmuring in his own manner. And then when he got down to the steps of his house, as he stood for the cab and whistled, then suddenly man came to him through the fog. Dear students, now I am going to start from page number 115. How is Mr. Holmes, sir? He asked. It was an old acquaintance, Inspector Morton of Scotland Yard. The person who came through the fog. He asked, how is Mr. Holmes, sir? From Dr. Watson. He was a person who knows very slightly about him, but he is not a close friend. He was Inspector Morton of Scotland Yard. He is very ill, I answered. I was surprised to see a slight smile upon his face. Dr. Watson replied to his question. He said that he is very ill. And then Dr. Watson was very surprised to see a slightly smiled face of Inspector Morton. However, before I could think more of it, the cab drove up and I left him. And then, after that, the cab arrived and he left the place. The house at Lower Burke Street had old-fashioned iron railings, a massive folding door, and shining brass work. A butler appeared and I took up my card. Here, in this paragraph, Dr. Watson explained how the house at Lower Burke Street looked like. It looks like a very old-fashioned which has an iron railings and a different sort of a door which has a shining brass work. And then when he reached to that place, a butler appeared. Butler means the chief manservant of a house, and he took up his card from the gate. Who is this person? What does he want? Well, I won't see him. Through the half-open door I heard his high, penetrating voice. When Dr. Watson was at the gate, he can easily hear the sound which is coming from inside the house. The person who is saying is that, and who is this person? What does he want? And doesn't want to see him. And this way he saw him through the very loud and clear voice which is coming from the house. Before the butler could deliver the message the person has given, I pushed past him and was in the room. Then, whatever the person has said who was inside the house, so whatever he said, the butler was about to deliver the message, but the door was half open, so he pushed the door and passed over him and he was in the room. With a shrill cry of anger, a man rose from a reclining chair beside the fire. What's this? He cried in a high and screaming voice. Then suddenly, when he was in the room, the person who was inside the house was sitting on a reclining chair beside the fire, and he suddenly rose and he was very angry. And he cried in a very loud voice, said, What's this? I'm sorry, said I, but the matter cannot be delayed. Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Then Dr. Watson said to him, I am sorry. He said that the matter that he wants to discuss cannot be delayed. And then he started his sentence with the mention of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. The mention of my friend's name had an extraordinary effect upon the little man. The look of anger passed in an instant from his face. Have you come from Holmes? He asked. When Dr. Watson mentioned Sherlock Holmes' name, then there was an effect on the person who was inside the house, and the expression of anger passed instantly from his face. And then he said, Then are you belongs to Holmes? He asked. He is desperately ill. He is dying. That is why I have come. The man turned to his chair, and as he did so, I caught a glimpse of his face in the mirror over the metal piece. I could have sworn that it was set in a malicious and hateful smile. When Dr. Watson mentioned the name of Sherlock Holmes and he started talking about him. He said that he is was turned and then he was doing something and then suddenly Dr. Watson saw a glimpse of his face in the mirror which is just above the metal piece. And man, the smile was very cruel and wicked. Yet he turned to me an instant later with genuine concern upon his features. I only know Mr. Holmes through some business dealings, but I have every respect for his talents and character. Then, the person who was facing the mirror has turned and he and the character in London knowledge turned towards him, concerned about that some business and he really respect him for the knowledge and the talent and the character of that person. You were the man in London who could help him because of your knowledge of Eastern diseases. Now Dr. Watson said that Sherlock Holmes said that you are the man in London who could help him because he has some Eastern diseases. Mr. Culverton Smith smiled pleasingly and picked up his cap. Then after all the conversation happened, Mr. Smith smiled and picked up his cap. I will come with you at once. I remembered Holmes' orders. I have another appointment, said I. Now, Mr. Smith was convinced what the Dr. Watson said. So he said, okay, I will come with you. But Dr. Watson knows and remembers the order which Sherlock Holmes had given. So he said that he has some another appointment. Very good, I will go along. You can rely on my being there within half an hour at most. Then Mr. Smith was saying that you can rely on me. I will reach his house at within half an hour at most. So my dear student, this is it for the part 2. The remaining chapter will be discussed in part 3.